So please, put your hands together for Dan Berwyn.
Is that it? Oh, okay. I was 6 years old with my dad, and the phone rang. And we were watching the Cub game, and the Cubs were losing by a run in the bottom of the ninth. And my dad reaches out to me with his hand, says, "Hold hands. It's the only way we're going to rally and win this game." So I held my dad's hand, and the Cubs lost. But there was a silver lining, because I got to hear my father shout out more curses, colorful and profane, than I'd ever heard in my life. I was a very sensitive, impressionable young 6-year-old, and I thought that was great. 3 weeks later, hand! And I held my dad's hand, and the Cubs won the game.
Yeah.
And my dad jumped up and down like a 4-year-old at a birthday party who'd been given a vat of frosting. He went ballistic. And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Whatever you do in this life, Dan, always listen to your old man." Well, this went on for about 40 years. Till the next time he said, "Hand." And I said, "Dad, I don't want to hold your hand right now. I'm 46 years old." And my dad said, "You don't want to hold my hand? Oh, you're all grown up now. What kind of a schmuck are you anyway? We need to win this game." And then he looked me in the eye and he kind of ripped out my heart and he said, "We're playing the Cardinals." So I held his hand. And the Cubs lost. There was a lot of back and forth and turmoil in our relationship as well. I guess it boils down to he thought kids didn't listen and I thought he didn't understand. So in that way, we were perfectly aligned. 5 years later, my father died. And a week later, my sister Wendy and I went to Wrigley Field, held hands, watched the Cubs win, and I brought a bag of ashes, my dad's ashes, to the ballpark and distributed them all around the field. And my sister was a little apprehensive about this. She said, "You know, we could get in trouble, we could get arrested from doing this, couldn't we?" And I said, "Yeah, but, you know, the punishment will be much less severe than anything the Cubs have done to us for the last 30 years." So, the Cubs continued to stink, but I held on to some of the ashes. And I told myself, if this team ever gets to win a pennant or the World Series, I'm going back to that ballpark and I'm going to spread some more of those ashes. Well, 3 years later, Cubs were getting a little better. They had some young talent. And I was watching a game in my living room, and the Cubs pitcher, Jake Arrieta, was throwing a no-hitter. And I went to the stairs in my house and I said, "Kids, I need you." And my kids, Noah and Asher, came downstairs and said, "Dad, what is it?" "Hand." And they knew what to do. We held hands, and the Cubs won the game. We got the no-hitter. And I turned to my kids. I said, "Kids, you gotta listen to your dad. I knew. This is what you gotta do." So it was about 14 months later, a Saturday night in October 2016, and the Cubs are going to play the Los Angeles Dodgers that night. And if the Cubs win the game, they're going to win the National League pennant and go to the World Series. And I had tickets to the game because my friend Mike and I had been talking about this since we were 16 and saving our quarters for many, many years. It was a lot of quarters. I knew what to do. That morning, I went to my dresser, top drawer of the dresser, I pulled it out, and from left to right, socks, underwear, bag of Dad's ashes. Went to the ballpark, sit down, and my phone is like going bing, 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 bing. My brother-in-law Wayne, my brothers, my sisters, my mom, my friends, my eye doctor who had given me Cub tickets once or twice over the years because he knew my eyesight wasn't so good. He didn't want to see a team. All of them were sending messages about this game. They were all holding hands virtually. And the Cubs won the game, and they won the pennant. It was such an emotional scene at that park. And I pulled out the bag of ashes, and I'm like, Dad, we're going to the World Series. And my dad was the most emotional person I've ever met. He's like, Dad, I can't believe it. This is amazing. I love you. We're going to the World Series. Who's pitching the first game on Tuesday? I said, John Lester. Now you may wonder at this point, like, why would you talk to a bag of ashes? Well, that's a good question. But at that moment, my dad and I were having a pretty good conversation. So I go downstairs to hopefully spread these ashes on the field. Reach down right next to the right field railing. I pull out ashes out of the bag. I throw them onto the field. And they blow back into my face. And I'm thinking, God, I knew my dad and I were close. Not this close. So, my father, though, had always taught me, never give up. I had more ashes in that bag. Who goes to the ballpark with just one handful of Dad's ashes anyway? Not me. So I was going to try it again. There were a couple of obstacles. First, I'm looking at the field, and there are several dozen security guards on the field. All of them twice as big as me and half as old, all right? But fortunately, it's the 21st century, so none of them are working. They're all looking at their cell phones. But then I had to confront nature, the wind at Wrigley Field, and my father was also a force of nature. I look up, and the flags in the outfield, you can tell by the way the wind is blowing whether home runs are going to fly out of the park or ashes can fly out to the field. I look up and I'm like, the wind is blowing. I'm like, come on. And I look up again and I say, God, can you just stop the wind for 1 minute? And I know what people are thinking. They're thinking, doesn't God have better things to do than grant favors to baseball fans? And at that moment, my answer was, no, like what? So I look up again, and the wind had stopped. I have met my moment. And I reach into the bag, and I have a moment of reflection. But my dad was not reflective. My dad was all impulse and instinct and the least patient person I've ever met. And I could tell he was saying to me, come on, let's go. Let's move this thing along. What's the delay? We got a game on Tuesday. And I said, Dad, I got this. And I threw a handful of my dad's ashes over the right field wall there. And I watched it descend onto the grass like the first snowfall of winter. And it was beautiful. And I looked at the field and I said, I love you, Dad. This is our year.
Yeah.